We need to ask two questions to come to grips with today's scripture. First question is, for whom was John writing his gospel? His gospel was written, the Gospel of John, about 100 years after the resurrection. At about 135, probably. So who was he writing for? He was writing, obviously, for Christians, but he didn't need to tell them all about the coming of Christ, the birth in Bethlehem, and all of that, because they already knew that from the other three Gospels, which had been written years and years before, and were circulating through the community around the world, the Mediterranean world at that time. So he was writing for Christians who by this time were getting a little antsy. They were expecting the risen Lord to return, and here it was 100 years later, and he still hadn't come back. And so they were beginning to get a little uneasy about this whole Christian thing. And so John tells them the story of the man who was born blind. I read the short version, but there's a longer version in the gospel, which is well worth reading. And in that reading, Jesus says to the disciples, right, as he's working this miracle, giving the man his sight, he says to his followers, few that there were, we must work. We must do the work of him who sent me. In other words, John is telling this story so that the people that are hearing it, his parishioners, if you will understand that what Jesus came to do is supposed to be continued in this time between his coming and his coming again. In other words, you folks out there are not just consumers of whatever Jesus has to offer, but you are the purveyors of whatever Jesus has to offer. And that's why I think the second reading probably bears the weight of the message this Sunday. Paul says to his people, many, many years before John writes to his people, Paul says, once you were in the darkness, but now you are light. You're not in the light, you are the light. I like to think of those old-time lanterns, that the flame is in the middle. It might be a candle, maybe kerosene, but around the back of the inside of the candle were mirrors, which amplified the light tremendously so that you could see your way. And I think that's a good description of what John is saying to his people, that we are the amplifiers of the light of Christ, not just like mirrors, but because the light has been given to us. It's within us. The second question we need to ask today, which brings this home, I think, is why is this gospel read on this particular Sunday of the year? And that's because in 3 weeks' time, large numbers of people will be baptized, will become light, will become the light of Christ in their world, in our world. And so Paul says to them and to us, live as children of light. Live as you are. Be who you are. The Lenten season was developed around preparation for baptism. All of us, I presume, have been baptized for more years than we like to remember. But the light is still there. But the light can be smothered, it can be dampened, and the light needs to go out into the world in which we live, because many of us are inadvertently living by a different light. There's other lights in the world. The culture, the entertainment world, there's all kinds of light. The political world. But the light of Christ needs to illuminate all those areas of our life. And so we've got to be in touch with the light within. And that, I think, is the message of this Sunday. As we, baptized people, prepare to renew our baptismal experience at Easter time, we need to ask ourselves, how brightly is Christ the light burning within my life? How much is it shining out on what I do, what I say, what I think, how I recreate, in all the areas of my life? And is it possibly illuminating my neighbor or leading my neighbor into darkness? So if we have slumbered in our Christian life, which all of us have to one extent or another, Christ says, sleeper, wake up, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you and through you.